The old rules for cheap travel are breaking right in front of people, and most travelers still have not noticed. The biggest one is this. The classic idea that booking super early always saves money is no longer something you can trust blindly. In 2026, airlines and travel platforms are pricing around new behavior patterns, and if you use old advice in a new market, you can easily overpay without realizing it. According to Expedia's 2026 Air Hacks data, the cheapest day to book flights is now Friday, not the old Tuesday myth people kept repeating for years. And for international flights, Friday is also the cheapest day to fly, with average savings of about 8% versus Sunday. Even more surprisingly, Expedia says the cheapest month for international travel is now August, with average fares about 29% lower than in December. So, if you were still planning travel the way people planned it 5 or 10 years ago, that is exactly how you get trapped by the new version of expensive travel. And that is the whole point of this guide. This is not about being cheap in a way that destroys your experience. This is about learning the back door. Because travel in 2026 is not impossible. It is just more rigged against people who do not understand where the real money leaks are. Now here's the first major shift. Most people think the flight is the main battle. Sometimes it is, but very often the flight is only the decoy. The real damage happens after you book. It happens through what I call the hidden friction tax. That is the money you bleed slowly through overpriced destination choices, bad timing, surprise local taxes, airport transfers, mobile data, wrong card usage, entry permit mistakes, and last-minute fixes that could have been prevented in 5 minutes before departure. And that is why some people come back saying travel is too expensive now, while someone else took the same trip window and spent hundreds, sometimes thousands less. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine 2 travelers booking the same 7-day Europe trip. Sarah books what looks like a safe plan. She picks a famous city at peak demand, books too early because she thinks that is always smart, lands without checking the latest entry rules, and stays in the most tourist-squeezed neighborhood because it looks convenient on Instagram. Mark does almost the opposite. He uses the new booking window instead of the old one, flies on a lower-cost day, chooses a destination dupe instead of the headline city, checks the digital entry requirement before paying for anything else, and times his hotel stay in shoulder season instead of peak season. Same continent, similar trip length, totally different bill. That is the gap this entire script is about. Let's start with flights, because this is where most people either win early or sabotage themselves before the trip even begins. One of the most useful 2026 findings is that for domestic economy flights, Expedia says the most affordable booking window is now 15 to 30 days out. Booking 180 days or more in advance was, on average, 130 more expensive. For international economy flights, Expedia's report found the cheapest average window was 8 to 15 days out, and even booking 31 to 45 days out still saved about 190s compared with booking more than 180 days ahead. That does not mean you should wait recklessly for every route, especially around holidays or major events. It means the old book 6 months early no matter what rule is dead as a blanket strategy. That is your first psychological reset. Stop thinking in terms of early equals cheaper. Start thinking in terms of price behavior. That is a much smarter mindset. Google has also been pushing this direction by building more price tracking and AI-assisted deal tools into Google Flights, including calendar views, price graphs, and an AI-powered flight deals feature designed specifically for flexible travelers who care most about saving money. Google also notes that, for cheap international flights, it is usually best to book a few months ahead, while domestic fares often need only a few weeks. In other words, use live pricing tools and route-specific tracking instead of obeying one rigid rule for every trip. This is where the AI sidekick comes in. In 2026, the smart way to use AI for travel is not asking it random questions like, "Where should I go?" That is too vague. The better use is price point arbitrage. You want AI and travel tools to help you spot when the same experience can be bought cheaper through timing, nearby airports, day shifts, or alternate destinations. Google's Flight Deals tool is literally built for that flexible bargain hunting behavior, and Skyscanner's flexible month search is designed to show you cheaper times across a whole calendar instead of trapping you into one exact date pair too early. So here is what you can do. Instead of searching one exact route once, search 3 versions. Search your main airport, then search for an alternate airport, then shift the trip by 2 or 3 days in each direction, then track it. That is the part casual travelers skip. They search once, get offended by the price, and conclude travel is impossible. Meanwhile, the person who watches price movement for a week often sees the same route behave completely differently. And now we get into what I call the August reset. If you only remember one seasonal airfare point from this video, remember this. Expedia's 2026 data says August is the most affordable month to fly internationally, while December is the most expensive, with August averaging about 29% cheaper. This is really important because a lot of people emotionally assume summer is automatically the most expensive time in every case. But in this market, international pricing has shifted enough that August can actually become the back door, especially once business travel patterns weaken at the end of the week and outside peak holiday windows. Now, let's talk about destination dupes, because this is where people can save the most without feeling deprived. One of the biggest mistakes travelers make is believing that the name destination is the experience. It usually is not. What they actually want is the feeling. Clear water, old towns, dramatic coastlines, warm evenings, walkable streets, good food, beach energy, mountain views, whatever it is. And once you separate the feeling from the brand name, the game opens up. For Europe, Albania is one of the clearest examples. Lonely Planet notes that Albania is far cheaper than nearby Croatia, Greece, and Italy. And Euronews described Albania as offering sun and sea appeal at a fraction of the cost of Greece. That is exactly the kind of destination dupe that makes sense in 2026. You still get Adriatic coastlines, old town texture, beach clubs, mountain villages, and Mediterranean energy, but without walking straight into the most inflated part of the pricing machine. And if you want a Mexico example, the Bacalar move is strong. Lonely Planet describes Bacalar as south of overexposed Tulum and centered around its famous lagoon. And while it says Bacalar is not backpacker cheap, it still frames the place as possible to do on a budget. On top of that, Lonely Planet's budget guidance for Mexico says shoulder season, especially July and August, is one of the cheapest times to visit much of the country. That means if people are chasing the aesthetic of a dreamy turquoise water Mexico trip, Bacalar in the right season can often make far more financial sense than defaulting to the most saturated hotspots. And for North America, this same thinking works too. A lot of travelers obsess over premium New England summer routes, but if what you really want is lighthouses, rugged coastlines, seafood, scenic drives, and maritime atmosphere, Atlantic Canada can be a smarter play. Lonely Planet's Nova Scotia budget guidance points out that spring and fall are the cheapest times to visit, which is exactly the shoulder season logic people need to understand more deeply. Sometimes the savings do not come from travel less. They come from travel one layer sideways. And that brings us to accommodation, where people quietly ruin otherwise cheap trips, because a cheap flight does not save you if your hotel strategy is lazy. In 2026, you cannot just sort by low price and pray. You have to think in clusters: shoulder season, edge neighborhoods, midweek check-in, alternative stay types, longer stays with lower nightly averages. Sometimes an eco-lodge, guest house, apartment, or RV rental gives you a much better price to experience ratio than the standard hotel search everybody else is competing over. But there is another problem now: over-tourism pricing. In some places, the stay itself is being loaded with extra costs. Amsterdam's tourist tax is 12.5% of the overnight price, and the Netherlands also increased VAT on overnight accommodation from 9% to 21% in 2026. Venice is also applying its access contribution on selected 2026 dates between April 3 and July 26. So when people say, "I found a cheap room," that often is not the final number anymore. This is why budget travelers in 2026 need to stop looking only at base prices. The real number is the after-tax, after-fee, after-access cost number. This is also why crowded destination names are getting more expensive in ways that are not always visible on the first search screen. The European Parliament noted in 2026 that 80% of travelers visit only 10% of global destinations, and lawmakers are openly discussing redirecting demand toward lesser-known places to reduce over-tourism pressure. That tells you the trend is structural, not temporary. The crowd is bunching into the same places, and governments, cities, and operators are responding with controls, taxes, caps, and restrictions. So, the traveler who keeps choosing only the most saturated postcard destinations is going to keep paying the premium. Now, here is the hidden friction tax I told you I would come back to. It is not one fee, it is death by 1,000 small mistakes. The first big one is digital entry requirements. The UK's ETA is now required for many visitors and costs $20. The EU's ETIAS system is also positioned as a digital travel authorization, with a planned $20 fee when implemented. These amounts are not trip killers by themselves. The problem is when people miss them, use fake third-party sites, get delayed, or discover the rule too late after paying for flights and hotels. That is how a tiny oversight creates a giant headache. A small permit can protect a much bigger booking. The second hidden friction tax is insurance negligence. People try to save $20 or $40 and then expose a $2,000 trip. The US State Department explicitly recommends buying travel health insurance before you go abroad, and reminds travelers that Medicare and Medicaid do not pay for care outside the United States. It also notes that travel insurance can cover problems like missed connections, lost baggage, and cancellation charges depending on the policy. That is exactly the "don't ruin your trip" part of this video. Cheap travel is not about removing every cost. It is about removing the stupid losses and protecting the important parts. So, if you want the no-ruin trip formula, here it is. Save aggressively on what is flexible. Protect aggressively on what can wreck the whole trip. Be ruthless on airfare timing, destination choice, stay type, and season. But do not be reckless with entry rules, insurance, passport validity, or airport logistics. That is how you travel cheap like an adult instead of traveling cheap like somebody gambling with their own vacation. And this is where I want to make one more important point. Cheap travel and miserable travel are not the same thing. A lot of people hear budget and think red-eye flights, terrible rooms, unsafe locations, or spending the whole trip stressed. That is not the strategy. The strategy is value concentration. Spend where the experience gets protected. Cut where vanity pricing lives. Most travelers do the opposite. They overpay for the famous zip code, then under-budget the parts that would actually make the trip smooth. So, if I were doing this from scratch in 2026, here is how I would build a trip. First, I would choose the experience, not the famous destination. Coastline, food, nightlife, culture, hiking, islands, city break, whatever. Second, I would create a short list of dupes. Third, I would search flights with flexible dates, alternate airports, and Friday departures in mind. Fourth, I would compare shoulder season versus peak dates before committing emotionally to the trip. Fifth, I would check the actual after-tax accommodation cost, not just the advertised price. Sixth, I would verify entry permits and insurance before locking in non-refundable bookings. That one sequence alone will put you ahead of most travelers. And if you are wondering whether all of this really changes the final number, yes, it does. Booking in the right window instead of blindly too early can save over $100 on domestic airfare, according to Expedia's 2026 data. Flying on Friday instead of Sunday can save around 8% internationally. Flying in August instead of December can save about 29% on average for international travel. Choosing Albania instead of a pricier Adriatic name can shift your whole daily budget downward. Choosing Bacalar or another smart alternative instead of the most overhyped Yucatan stop can preserve the vibe while lowering the burn rate. And avoiding surprise taxes, access fees, permit issues, and uninsured mistakes can be the difference between a cheap trip and a ruined one. So, the real lesson is this. In 2026, travel is not cheaper for everyone. It is cheaper for informed people. That is the difference. The industry is getting more dynamic, more algorithmic, and more crowded at the top. The old lazy rules are getting punished, but the back door still exists for travelers who understand timing, flexibility, alternatives, and protection. And here is the one thing I want you to do right now, today, before you click off. Pick one trip you think is too expensive, just one. Then rerun it using this system. Check a Friday departure. Compare August against December if the route makes sense. Shift the booking window, swap the headline destination for a dupe. And before you price the hotel, check what the taxes and entry rules really are, because the gap between what most people think travel costs are and what it can cost is still massive in 2026. You just have to know where the trapdoors are.